a little bit about Grandpa Ferdinand. And so I asked Dad, why did he decide to leave Germany and immigrate to the United States? And Dad said, gave me 4 reasons. And the first one was that the only job that he could find in Germany was to pick rock. And they must have been building those rock line fences over in Europe in those days, and they go out and pick the rock up. Also, Ferdinand had a number of siblings as well. They could only subdivide the land that they had, and so there would have been very small parcels. The second reason was that where there was possible work was if he were to volunteer for the draft and go fight for the Kaiser, and he didn't really want to do that. And then the third reason was that his dad, Ferdinand's dad, my great-granddad, who I never knew, I never knew Ferdinand either, but my great-granddad operated a bar or a pub. Ferdinand, along with his brother John and his brother Peter, they thought those younger brothers were spending way too much time in the bar, and so they. And then the fourth reason was there was free land, the Homestead Act, and probably associated with that is there were families from that town, that area where he lived, that had immigrated and that were living in South Dakota, and so they were the contact point, and that was really the Schlimgen family. Oh. I always wondered why go to Mitchell to buy clothes. There was one clothing store where we always went to, and the salesperson there was a Schlimgen. 3 brothers, John, Ferdinand, and Peter, came over together. It turned out that at that time, John was already married and had a child, and his wife was a Wormers. Ferdinand was not married, but was engaged. His wife was Christina Grotzfeld, and I found out much later that actually my good friend Herb Wormers, that his granddad was born in Grotzfeld, Germany.
Really?
So those little villages were really close together. And
how old was Ferdinand?
Yeah, early 20s. Mom, her maiden name was Meyer, M-A-Y-E-R. The story is that went to breakfast and that she was working as a waitress and served him breakfast and someplace in Illinois. And when Nick and Eva were first married, they lived in northeastern Iowa. And one story that I heard about that was that there was a creek right by their house, but in spring when the water would be up, they had to get across that creek, and one way they did it was to tie a rope on big tree branches on each side, and then they would go across the river hanging on the rope. Elizabeth was the last one born there. Really? Before they moved to the Dimock area. So Dad maintained he didn't have a middle name. His name was John J, and only the initial J.
Oh.
I told him, yeah, you're kidding me. You must have had a middle name. He said, no, it's just an initial. Actually, Wilford told me this. The church that they had burned down. It was a frame church, and actually Mother remembered that the day of that fire because they only lived a couple miles southwest of the church. So they had to build a new church and they had to pay for it, of course. And I think certain families maybe contributed had got the right to use a pew, so it was considered to be their pew. And it turns out that the Meyer pew was right behind the Kurtenbach pew, the Ferdinand Kurtenbach pew. She was actually older than John, and Theodora was 11 years younger than John. We talk about AI now, how things can be done. Well, when he would drop her off a couple miles southwest of Dimock, he had to go, because the Ferdinand Kurtenbach farm was a couple miles northeast of Dimock, so there was about a 4 or 5 mile separation. But the horse knew that, so he would just tie the reins up to the post on the buggy, and he would sit back and go to sleep. And when the horse got to the barn door, it would stop, and then he would wake up and put the horse away. So, you could say that was kind of automated.
Her dad courted Mother on Billy the horse, and Mother would often talk about it. I know that's not about Grandpa and Grandma, but Billy was the horse.
And then a couple of kind of big events, I think, for all of us. One was when we bought our pony Prince. We were begging for a pony, and Dad found out about one that was available between Dimock and Parkson, actually. So we went out and looked at the horse, and Dad said he thought it would be fine. And so the way we brought the pony home is we just tied a rope to his halter, led him from the car as we drove home. I thought it might not work, but it worked fine. Also involving transportation was when Dad decided to buy a bicycle for us. So all of us boys shared this pony, and we also shared our bicycle. And that was probably good training for us. We learned how to share early in life, and that was always helpful. Like in about the 7th or 8th grade is when Dad was planning to remodel the barn. He probably to keep us out of mischief, gave us paper and pencil and told us to draw up a floor plan for what the barn should look like when it was remodeled. And that may have stimulated my interest in building things, because I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed being asked to do it. Another memorable event actually kind of occurred more than once, and it was always in the late fall of the year. And it typically occurred late at night, after midnight, when there'd be a storm coming in, and we had the stock cows in Aunt Ella's pasture across the road from the farm. We needed to let them come up to the farm. We always had a straw pile that they could bed down around. And yeah, I remember that because barely awake. It was chilly, that's why we were doing it. And usually snow was blowing. But the cows wanted to come home. They didn't resent that at all. So we just had to get the gates open and let them come in. And of course they had their calves with them. Between the 6th and 7th grade, in kind of late August, and we had some heifers that were bred late, and they were calving late, and heifers were a little young, and Dad was interested in making sure I checked every day. And this one day I went and checked, and they were way at the other end of the pasture, which was about a half a mile across north and south. I saw this heifer that was trying to calve and was having trouble. I could see that I wasn't going to be able to get the job done. So I jumped on the pony Prince, and Dad had told me, always ride around those little hilltops, and because there are badger holes on top, and always go around those. Well, that was a big, exciting time, and so I just hit the straight line for the gate to get home, and it went across one of those hills, and I remembered that for the rest of it. I still remember it today because Prince stepped in a hole with his right foot and went down, and my right leg was under him. Fortunately, I didn't have a saddle on. I was just riding bareback. I was able to get up, and Prince got up, and I was able to get back on, even though my knee was hurting. And got home, and fortunately Dad was there, and we went out and weren't able to save the calf, but we did save the cow. My first surgery on that knee was the first year we were married, so I went all through the rest of grade school, high school, all through the military, even played football. And then 60 years later in 2020, I got a knee replacement. And so my knee pain in my right knee is now gone.
Well, I was a gopher. I had to go get this and go get that and do whatever my older brothers wanted. And also chores, I fed the chickens and picked up the eggs, and I carried the calves in from the cob shed to the cook stove. But I didn't really have a whole lot to do. I had a lot of playtime. I messed around with rabbits, and I had a pony, and Prince was my godsend. And as I got older, I used to just jump on Prince without a bridle or saddle and go get the cows in, and that kind of stands out as being a fun part of my life. I didn't get to do the physical farm labor until I was quite a bit older. I can remember driving the tractor for Dad when he was planting corn, and he would comment that he did better with horses, but it was all fun. It was all good and fun.
I started out feeding pigs and also took care of chickens and chicks. When I got older and Frank could milk, Frank and I would milk one cow together, one from each side. Albert could finish faster by himself than the two of us together. On the way to school, we would deliver the milk, and on the way home, we would pick up the empty containers and bring them back to the farm.
Dad wanted me to do chores. So actually I started. I recall this cow we named Daisy. When I was in the 3rd grade, I would get out and milk Daisy. And then later on, my younger brothers helped me. And when we got older, Saturday was always work day. We'd have to clean out the barns and haul bedding in, and we had to keep that organized. Wilfred, he helped us in a lot of ways. Dad kind of orchestrated some of that too, because Wilfred was able to buy a small farm adjacent to our farm, allowed Dad and Wilfred to work together in terms of their farming.
Dad was a very good organizer because when we weren't old enough or big enough to do a lot of work, a lot of his brothers helped us out a lot. So Dad had a way of managing horsepower or workforce.
Good foreman?
Yeah, he was a very good foreman, exactly. Yep. We can remember that one of our chores was after 1959, which was one of the driest years I ever seen, but we redid the horse stalls and we started milking. And from then on, Grandpa, or not, Wilford always, he was up at 5:30 in the morning to milk cows. Rain or shine, that was your job and you just did that.
Thing about Wilford, you told me the story that he told you the day you were born. Do you want to share that story?
Oh yeah, that was interesting for him, and interesting for me to hear. Yeah, he said that particular morning he woke up, and his room in our house was way on the south end above the kitchen, so he was kind of insulated from what happened on the north end, where Mom and Dad slept in the downstairs bedroom in the northeast corner. Particular morning he got up and went downstairs, and the stove wasn't lighted. The cook stove, which was always it was in the kitchen and always the first stove to get lighted. And then looked out the west window and saw that the horse barn door was open. And that was unusual because it was January. Always had a couple teams of horses in the barn. Always closed the door at night. So he put on his winter coat and went out and to close the barn door. And he got down there and he saw that old King, one of the reliable horses, therefore was in the front stall, was standing there with his harness on. That was unusual because they always took the harnesses off the horses when they put them in the barn. Wilford was 15 years old at this time, and he took the harness off and fed the horses a little bit and closed the barn door and went back up to the house. And after a while, Dad came out of the bedroom and said, well, you got a baby brother.
Why did they need the horse?
Well, the automobiles at that time were not sophisticated as they are today, and the fuel and was not as functional. And so typically on a cold winter morning, the cars didn't start with the starter. They had to get the car started, and so he had to have the horse pull it so that the engine would be turning over. And Dad popped the clutch, and Lolly was the midwife, and she delivered. But then the doctor would come out too, but she would be there to assist, which was my mother's older sister.
Well, grew up doing some kind of chores as soon as we were old enough to help out. I had to take the ashes out of the two stoves that we burned a lot of cobs and wood in, take the ashes out at least every other day, and then light a fire, which was, I can't believe we didn't burn the house down because we had a small open can of kerosene standing on top of the cob box right behind a bucket of water. And we'd always dump just a little bit of kerosene on those cobs and then throw a match in there and get them started. Grates and everything were still hot from the night before. We'd sometimes blow the lids off the top of the cook stove. I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old when that was one of my events early in the morning. But I was relegated to the chickens, and I think that's when I learned to hate the chickens, because when it was my turn to be on the farm, I said, I'll do this, but we're not going to have any chickens, and so we sold off everything that we could except for about 40 hens that we kept over, but the rest of them were gone. I didn't want any of those chickens around. Everybody had chores before dinner, and then we sometimes milked the cows after dinner. One year, Brother Ivan was off to the seminary out in Wisconsin, and we so I was all by myself. I did all of it, but usually there was 3, 4, 5 of us doing a variety of chores in the morning. We had about an hour and a half before breakfast, and then breakfast, change clothes, and get ready to school. We had to be in Dimock by 20 after 8. When there was somebody old enough to drive, it was usually an early run in the morning. We'd sometimes leave the farm just shortly after it got daylight. There'd be a carload of us. Still drove the old Plymouth for till about 1950, and then we blew the engine in that hunting rabbits one night. Actually, Bill Warmers did it, and the car was about enough dings on it and enough problems that it was ready to go anyway.
All right, Dale's first day of school.
Dad couldn't take me. I don't know why. And so he put me out at the end of the driveway, and as Grandpa's children were going to school, they were also carrying milk cans in the back of the Packard. And I assumed there were 7, 8 kids in there, because I think they all were in school, except for Aunt Rita, because she was younger than me. And the car stopped, and they just opened the door and pulled me in, and I think I laid across laps on the way to school. It's a memory I will never forget.
Dale talked about his first day of school. I will talk about my last one. It was the greatest day I ever had in my life, graduating from school.
The 5-year plan.
Yeah, the 5-year plan.
Yeah, she took a lot of pictures with a little box camera. Well, she wanted the sun in our face because that would make for a clear picture, but the sun was very bright on those days. She had to have a bright sun to get a picture. And there were no indoor pictures because she did not have a flash. Got to know Magdalene. We were living in the same house on the farm, and she was helping my mother, her aunt, with these children that were all quite young and quite active. She was a big help to our family when she was trying to manage us. She would emphatically state, and I don't mean maybe. That was when we first had our first radio. We had a long antenna outside, and she liked music and liked popular music, and so she could now hear that. Before that was just phonograph records, but now she could hear the more recent songs, and she actually kept a little booklet in the drawer just beneath the radio, and when a song would come on that she was trying to learn the words to, she would jot down those a few more words. The winter of 1942, that was a very difficult winter in the Dimock community, really, and especially in our house because of scarlet fever. That was a very contagious disease, and so we were quarantined in our farmhouse, and Dennis was quite ill, and he and I were sequestered to the front bedroom, which had a door that was closed. It was just demanding. As we went through that period, and that was in February, Dad came down with pneumonia. We didn't have any telephone then. Telephone was not working. So she bundled Jack up to walk over to Wilfred's house, which was 1 mile. Wilfred and Marie lived 1 mile west of us on the county line. And that was before we had the modern clothing for young people. Just trousers, or probably a bib overalls, and a coat and overshoes. Jack walked, he was in the 4th grade, and he walked over to Wilfred's, And as he just about got there, Marie noticed him, and then Wilfred went out and met him and came over and helped out. So I remember the night that Alice was born because I slept in the room above the bedroom, and Lolly was the midwife for that. But when Rita was born, Mother went to the hospital. She said that was better.
I think Mom was maybe 43 when I was born, and Dad was probably 54. It was a blizzard that we had, this horrible blizzard, and I was probably 5, so that one might have been like in 1948, I would say. The children had all gone to school. They were all gone except for Rita and myself and Mom and Dad. So Dad had already taken everybody to school, obviously, and come back. But then the blizzard started that day while everyone was at school, and they couldn't get home. So now some of this is because some of my siblings told me part of this story, and some of it is because I remember part of the story. But Jack and Al would have both been in high school, and then Dennis and Dwayne and Frank and Eva and Ivan would have been in elementary school in Dimock. And Rita and myself were still on the farm, because I was 5 and Rita was probably 2.5. Anyway, the blizzard was so bad that I think it lasted 3 days before they could come home. So they all had to stay at school. Except for Jack and Al, they went to my aunt's house. Aunt Christine, my father's twin sister, lived close to Parkston High School. And so they walked to her home and stayed with her in Parkston, and then ended up 3 days later taking the train back to Dimock. Dwayne told me part of this story. Dwayne and Dennis, he said, shoveled coal into the coal burner at the St. Peter and Paul Elementary School to keep the school warm. I think Frank probably I haven't asked him what he did, but I'm guessing he helped shovel back. There was a privy out back, and the boys all the boys I think used that privy out back. And so I think they had a shovel to get to it. And Eva said she read a lot of books. And Ivan didn't tell me what he did during that period of time at school. He was probably pretty young. Maybe, I don't know, 2nd grade or whatever. Well, Mom brought a mattress down from upstairs and put it down on the floor between the icebox and the oil burner. And Rita and I were to stay on that mattress because it was warm there, and Dad and Mom shoveled snow for all that time. They had to get our hog. This must have been an early snow in the fall, and so our hogs were still on the east barn, and there was no water for them down there. They had to get to the west where there was water. So Mom and Dad had to shovel all that way for those hogs to get and go through our house yard and then down to the west where there was water for the hogs, because they were the lifeline of our family. We ate those hogs, that pork, for our meals, and they sold those pigs. So that was really close I remember that, and I was 5. Rita remembers it, and she was younger than me. So then in 3 days, Dad he could get I guess horses. He took the horses and a wagon and went into town and got all those children from school, and with lots of blankets in the back of that wagon, and brought them back home. So it was a really exciting time, I guess. But Rita and I were only to walk to the west window in the dining room. We could go to the west window and watch Mom and Dad shovel. And Rita says that we could eat soda crackers. I don't remember
Close
that.
memories of my parents. One, I came down stairs after Easter Sunday one morning, and I was doubled over in pain, and my mother picked me up and sat me in her lap. I was a 6th grader. Dad came in the house, and I'd never heard her talk like that before. She said, "Johnny, get that car ready. We got to take this kid to the doctor." And I got to the doctor on time, and I had my appendectomy. But I'll never forget that pain. I was always kind of favored when Al and Dennis and Dwayne were in the military, and I was running the farm for those 2 years. Dad and I walked out to bring a hog in from the far corner that was building a nest to have her pigs, and we walked her all the way back into the barn, got her in the barn, and Dad said, "Now, Frank, let's work out a plan here. You kind of like this farming. Would you like to take over the farm?" I said, "Dad, there's not a chance. I'm going to school, and next fall when that scholarship kicks in, and I'm not going to look back." So I have no plan to run this farm the rest of my life. So that was the last of my farming career.
Well, the earliest memory I have is as a youngster, he would cross his leg and he would let me ride on his foot, and he'd say, "Ride the pony, Ivan, ride the pony." And I really remember that, and it was a good memory.
My dad was quiet. I had an interesting day. Snowed in for a month, and he needed a haircut. He kind of watched me when I used to cut my brother's hair, so he said, "I'll help you with it." So he sat down in the chair, and I didn't realize that when you get my age now, the barber has to cut hair out of your ears and your nose and Dad said, "Yeah, finished his haircut," and he said, "You got to cut the hair out of my nose and my ears." And I thought that was kind of funny because I had never experienced that before. That was kind of a little bit of pleasure to just to sit and talk to him while I was cutting his hair. I had him in a trapped position under the cloth, so I got a chance to talk right into his ear.
My best memory of Theodora is that on Sunday mornings she would do some personal grooming, and this was when we lived in the farmhouse. And she would sit by the dining room table, and she would have her grooming tools such as a hand mirror or her comb and brush, and she would brush her hair, and then she would braid her hair, and then she would do the wrapping around of her hair around her head as she wore her final look for the day. And my dad, John, he would climb the ladder on the wind charger, and he would look out over the land that he owned and just see how crops were doing, perhaps cattle were doing. Just the satisfaction probably of reviewing the land.
Hi, I'm Audrey. I am the daughter of Marie, the oldest of this Kurtenbach clan. She was married to Pat Walls. My parents farmed for some time in the beginning of their lives together, and then ultimately started the cafe and the restaurant out at Dimock Corner. That's where most of you may remember them from. They moved there, our family there, in 1951. My favorite memory about my grandpa is, as a child, I had rheumatic fever, and I missed a whole lot of school, a whole lot of the first grade. And my grandpa used to come over to see me every day. I could hear the doorbell ring that was signaling somebody was coming into the cafe, and then I would hear Grandpa's voice, and he would say, "Marie, I'm going to take my coffee in the back." And then boom, there he would be standing there with me. He checked my arithmetic. I read to him. I had to do different classwork while he was there. He was always helping me with that. He told me stories. He taught me how to play so many different card games. And no matter what, some days he was there an hour, some days he may be there 2 hours or a half an hour, but he was there every day. And that time with him is some of the most precious memories of my life.
But, we didn't have I didn't have a lot of conversation with my dad over the years, and he was a quiet person. We were kind of a maternally run family, so Mom did all the repair work in the house. She was always the one that helped us with our making decisions. It was a little different situation than most families, but Dad was 65 years old when I graduated from high school, so we had the opportunity to clear a certain amount of the hay mow, and we had a basket up so we could play basketball after chores. Usually it was Al and I spent a lot of time up there, kind of helped out for later on in life when I was a sophomore in high school. I made the basketball team, and probably it was because of all the shooting we did at night. It was always so cold up in that hayloft. You'd have to slap your hands against the wall or against each other and keep them warm enough so you could handle the ball. But that was a lot of fun. We spent a lot of hours up there playing basketball. Mostly it was Al and I.
We would play a little bit of baseball out in front of the house. He would stand up with his back to what we called the house yard, and bat balls out to us, and basically it was what you might call infield practice. And so one of us would kind of shag for him, and then probably try to keep a couple balls going. So that was always fun because we were interacting, and baseball was a big sport for us in Dimock at that time.
Al loved sport from the very beginning. He'd organize all kinds of games. When I was a little kid, we'd have a rock on an ice pond, and we'd find sticks and try to pretend like we were playing hockey, but we were in overshoes running around on the ice. Sometimes a big frozen couch, or it became the puck. We had all kinds of games that we played, and Sunday afternoons in the summertime he'd organize a baseball game. There was a bunch of other kids in the neighborhood. There was about 4 teams, and we'd kind of rotate around. We had a diamond laid out in our pasture, but there was a cow path that went right through that caused a few bad hops once in a while. My dad always got upset when I mowed the infield, mowed that short, and I mowed the outfield high with a sickle bar, when he thought I was wasting a lot of forage. It wasn't unusual to have 10, 12 cars parked around out there along first and third base. First and third base lines, and we didn't care if we were down 18 runs. We still played out the game. We were going to win it, by golly. Very competitive. And so then later on, I got to play Junior Legion ball. And it was because we had all those games. We'd go out and hit fly balls after chores were done. But Al did a heck of a job of organizing those games and organizing things. Like he has organized family gathering for about 30 years. those things were important for him, and he loved sport. Making suggestions. He wasn't a very good athlete, but he worked hard at it, and he loved sport, and it showed up in life. And he ended up having a scoreboard company, so it was interesting to see that development.
But I wanted to talk about some of the fun times we had. We played a lot of baseball and softball and catch, and we had one bicycle, so we rode the bicycle. We had Prince, our horse, and we had another horse named Trigger, and or Flicker. I forget his name. Flicker, I forget. Anyway. So we did all of those, and in the winter we would play basketball on a half court up in the barn where the hay bales were, and so that was always fun too. I liked all of those things, and I liked all of the board games that we would play. We played a lot of Tripoli, played a lot of checkers, and we have the checkerboard at home hanging on the wall, so that we used. Then we played a lot of cards, of course, every kind of card game. We also played Annie Over. I forgot about Annie Over, which was another ball game, I guess. We had this, what they called the old wash house out back behind the house, in the house yard. And you would throw the ball over. There'd be some on one side, some of us on one side, and some of us on the other side. And you throw the ball over. If it didn't go over, you had a called pig's tail, and then you'd try again, Annie over, Annie over. So there the ball would go over at the top, and then whoever caught the ball on the other side, you would race around, and you always had to get to the opposite side of where you were. But the people who caught the ball would throw the ball at you trying to catch you, and if they caught you, well then, so that was the deal. We also had swings, and we played on those swings a lot. They were also in the house yard. We had a rabbit in a rabbit cage back there. We had a sandbox. We played in that sandbox with all the trucks and cars. But when I played softball, and Eva played then, and she was a catcher, and I played different positions. I played left field, I played third base, I played shortstop, I played second base. I played a lot of those, but I liked ball a lot. And Rita played later for Parkston, so it was really fun. We played a lot of ball.
I think my best memory is how good they were to each other, how they enjoyed each other's company. They were never argued in front of the family. If they had something they would go in the bedroom and close the door, and then someone would make a decision.
First of all, they were very kind to each other and never had spats in front of us. I'm sure they must have discussed many things, but we did not know about them or hear about them. A fond memory I have of my dad would be, I always enjoyed taking lunch out to him in the field when he was working in the field. That was fun for me to take lunch out there and see how he worked. Another fond memory I have of Dad would be like him sitting in the rocking chair. He had this black wooden rocking chair that was between the oil burner and the ice box in the dining room. And he would sit there and read the paper after dinner. Also, sometimes of Dad, he would be sitting in that chair in the evening, and I would be going upstairs to go to bed, and I'd say, "Good night, Dad," and he'd say, "Good night, God bless you, and sleep good." Sometimes Mom would be out in what we called the washroom, and she had her sewing machine there. She did a lot of patching and sewing, and in the evenings, and so then Dad would go out there and sit with her, and they'd visit. And this was the south room in our house. But sometimes I would go there and sit with them, and I'd be stringing buttons onto a string that had a wooden spool of thread, at the bottom of, but I would be sitting out there doing that and listening to them visiting. It was kind of fun. A memory I have of both of them has to do with storms in the summer. We would have these nasty thunderstorms in the summer, and since we were farmers, once you got your crop in and you had cultivated it and it was growing, and you didn't want it to get hailed. If it was in the middle of the night, we'd all get up, we'd sit around the dining room table, and we'd pray the rosary. Because we, of course, our livelihood was our crops and our animals. Then we'd open the dining room door. Dad and Mom would both sort of pace. They would be watching the storm, and we would all be praying with them.
Well, I remember Grandpa John the most, but probably I've never really seen him work that hard besides playing cards. And then Theodora, she kind of was the head of the household, and when she spoke, John listened. That's all I can remember about her, and she was a very good grandmother.
Grandma Theodora, I admired her because every Christmas night and Easter Sunday noon, she had 25 extra people for those particular meals, and I thought that was very commendable. The best memory of Grandpa John is I had to drive a tractor with the binder behind me, and he was in the seat, and I wasn't a very good driver. And he had language that I didn't think a grandpa would say. So that was me.
Sometimes on Easter Sunday or, a particular Sunday, they were usually home for a while anyway, or for a big dinner. Mrs. Kurtenbach always seemed to have a big dinner.
And then did Dad look forward to coming home on the holidays?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he really did.
And who all showed up?
Well, the table was full, the kitchen table. So it was always there, the 9 children, and then the 3 older ones, and the half brother. We have such a son, half brother, Wilford.
Well, Grandpa John, I remember he could really cuss. Because when Ivan took the wheel of that old B John Deere and scraped her along the granary and left a mark, there was a lot of words there. And then when Frank would tighten something up and break it, there would be more words. And Thora, she was just a good old grandma. There was always cookies, stuff like that. With Grandpa John, I can remember the time when something broke on the tongue, and Frank was to fix it. And of course, Frank was very strong. And I remember Grandpa John using certain words not to break that bolt. And he did break the bolt because he didn't listen to Grandpa John, and he turned it too tight and he broke it. Grandma?
What is your best memory of riding in the car as a family?
Well, I think the most interesting part of it was getting in the car. We kind of had to get in rotation, and everybody, all us little ones, sat on other people's laps. So I think just loading the car was an experience that I'll never forget.
My best memory is one cold mornings, the car wouldn't start, and Dad would have to take us all to school. And sometimes the car would have to be pulled by the horse, and when it did finally get going, he'd get the heater on, and I got to sit in the center in front where the heater was. But it was very, very cold.
When the family rode together, the back seat was layered. The older boys were on the seats with the younger boys on their laps. Grandpa drove, and Mother held the baby. Eva would sit in the middle up front to help me with the baby. Sometimes Ivan, no talking.
I do remember this one car trip we were going to take somewhere. and Rita was in between Mom and Dad, and so there were 2 layers in the back. So I'm not sure who all these people were in the back, but I know I was in the back, and I was seated on Jack's legs. And the reason I remember that is because Jack said after we got wherever we were going, he said, "Alice, you sure have a bony bottom."
Sometimes there'd be Sunday evening car rides. And again, like I say, my mother was organized. We each had a spot in the car that was our spot. And in the back seat, there were 2 layers. I had somebody on my lap. And we were 3 wide and 2 deep. And then the little children were in the front.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember how your mom settled disputes between your siblings?
Well, she settled them with authority, and it was not unusual to get a backhand across the side of the face to emphasize a point.
I have a few great memories from riding in the car. I still remember when we'd visit one of the older ones, and we'd all go together in that 2-door Plymouth. There'd be 5 in the front and 6 in the back, and we sat, Jack and Al and Dennis were on the bottom row, and Dwayne and myself and Ivan were on the sitting on their laps. Needless to say, we drove to Marsling's house, was the furthest, that was about 12, 14 miles, and things got pretty edgy by the time we got there. And then on the way home, we'd be half asleep. Well, as we got along together, sometimes in that car, it was a little difficult because 6 boys in the back was just a bit crowded. The greatest memory that I'll never forget, Dad chewed tobacco. We got out on one of those drives, and he had his window open and the back window was open, and he spit out the front window and it came in the back window. And then the other thing was, if the windows were closed, if the weather was cold, he had the habit of lighting up a White Owl cigar before we started leaving the farm, and we all would give him a bad time about that smoky, stinky old White Owl cigar.
Epiphany Sunday, which is, just a week after Christmas, we went to Mass in 2 cars at this point. This was, I think, probably living at home. People were Frank and Eva and Ivan and myself and Rita and Mom and Dad. So we would go to Mass in Dimock in 2 cars. And Frank and Ivan had taken 1 car, and Dad and Mom and Eva and myself and Rita had taken the other car. So anyway, we had gone to Mass, and we were on our way home, and on Old 37, which is a gravel, and this was winter, and we're coming north on Old 37, going north to the county line, and all of a sudden we see this car in the ditch ahead of us, and we get up there, and it's Frank and Ivan, and the car is rolled over in the ditch. And I just remember Mom saying, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, help us." And we were waiting, and I guess they got out, and we drove them back home.
Later on in life, probably the most unique memory was when I rolled over the car on the way home from church on a Sunday morning. I was actually playing with the radio and lost control on a strip of loose gravel and swung back and forth across the road until I slipped in the ditch, and instead of going down in, I naturally pulled it out and started to roll, and I remember sliding along on the top of the car with the grass going over the windshield. Lucky the windshield fell or slipped to the outside. Ivan and I were the only ones in there, and when we rolled up against a utility pole and broke that pole off about 2 feet from the ground, but we were lucky at the bottom of the car, the framework hit the pole, and we were up on the side, so we were seated in the seat. Neither one of us had a scratch. He got up first. He was on the high side and walked out through the windshield opening, and then I got up out from behind the steering wheel and stepped out. Parents were right behind us, and Mom was almost hysteric. I never got reprimanded for it, but Dad said, well, that's a lesson well learned. So after that, if I had an incident where the car was headed in the ditch, I just took it on down, because that's how you roll them over, is when you try to pull them back out, and so they'll start to roll.
My best memory of riding in the car as a family was rides to church on Sunday morning. We went to church in Dimock, and we would go in our Packard. Dad would drive, Mom would be in the passenger seat in the front, and Eva and Alice and I would be sitting in the back seat. Generally, it was just a quiet drive to church. Again, it would just be a quiet drive from church back to the farmhouse.
Us 4 boys sat in the back, and we got threatened a lot of times. If we didn't settle down, we was going to be walking home. That was one of Dad's favorite things to say, and for some odd reason, we was always cutting up. My favorite story in the car, and Vilas is going to remember this very well. Vilas got off rows in the cornfield, and he took one whole row off the field across the house. And every Sunday morning, I think Dad talked about that row being out. Every look to the pasture, he always had to look at that cornfield across the road and see that row, and he would speak about that every single morning.
Anything to add, Danny?
Oh, yeah. We was down at the county fair and trip. It was a hot day, humid hot. Just the wind was even hot. And I said something about just how nice and cool it'd be if we was on a motorcycle. And I got explained to her, that isn't going to make no difference. And Dad put it in real words, not baby cake, did he? He told me how dumb I was.
It was one of them times when I must have misbehaved in church, and I thought I got away with it.
Oh, no.
Anyhow, nothing was said on the way home. Dad pulled in front of the house with that 53 Ford. And he got out, and I got out, but guess what? He got me before I had a chance to get to the house. He explained to me that you should be good in church. I remember that real plain.
Do you have assigned seats at the dinner table also?
Oh, yes. I can tell you the order. Dad sat on the north end, and there was a high chair beside him on his left, and that's where the baby was. And then Grandma sat on the east side, but at the far north end. So if you go, so she, of course, was there to feed the baby and help with that. Mm-hmm. They would take turns. And then was Alice, then was Eva, and then was me on the east side of the table. And if you go on the west side of the table, up next to Dad was Ivan, Duane, and then Dennis, and then Frank, and then Jack was at the end. Mm-hmm. It just occurred to me that that's maybe why Ivan was always into mischief, because Dad wasn't quite the disciplinarian that Mother was.
Ivan always smoked when he was real young, and so he'd tap that cigarette package and hand me a cigarette and say, well, yeah. And he'd light up, and I'd take the cigarette he gave me and open the window and throw it out in the ditch. And so after a while, he learned that I wasn't going to smoke it. But at any rate, he and I were together for that 1 year, and what an experience. He he didn't like to do the odds and ends. I was trying to get the yard cleaned up, and one night, and he and Mark Mark pulled in, and I didn't even realize that Ivan had slipped away and changed clothes, and he jumped in the car and was gone. Left me all by myself to finish up the work, but he was quite a guy. Life of his own. He was spoiled. He was the youngest boy, so he kind of did what he pleased.
It was wonderful having the family. That was nice. But the thing that Mom would tell people when they would ask her, what does Eva do? She says, well, when she finishes what I tell her, I can always find her upstairs somewhere reading a book. I would go in the closet and and read a book, or in anybody's closet. When I got older, I went in Eller and Jack's closet because it was nobody was sleeping in that room, and I put the light on and I closed the door. So,
well, I tried not to get into mischief, but I got a good one on Brother Dennis one day. Did you ever hear about pinning a glass of water on the wall?
No.
Well, I went out and I got me a glass of water and a pin, and I convinced Dennis I could pin that glass of water on the wall, and got out on the front porch. I got up on the railing and I held the glass up high and I was trying to pin it, and I happened to drop the pin by mistake. And Dennis stooped over to pick it up. I dumped the glass of water on his head. I jumped off the porch and I ran like hell. And everybody thought it was funny except Dennis. I guess that's the best one I pulled as a youngster.
One day we were playing hide and seek in our neighbor's farm. The boy living there was being raised by my godfather. We were playing hide and seek. I was hiding on the farm equipment when I fell.
Yeah.
And cut a very deep cut in my shin of my left leg. I had to go to the doctor and get stitches put in late at night. And because I was such a good guy, I got to go get ice cream and meet with Marceline.
There were certain things that probably were considered mischief. We might raid a watermelon patch now and then or something. And we took our responsibility of keeping the farm going pretty serious.
Mm-hmm. No, they were pretty close, tight-lipped, really. They didn't talk too much. I know that Albert got in trouble once for spiking the punch at the 8th grade graduation, high school graduation, I think.
We had a long dining room and a long dining room table. We would have chairs at the ends of the table and then chairs all along the sides. Well, sometimes when my older brothers and sisters would go out, principally my older brothers, I think, when they would go out on probably a Friday or a Saturday night, and they would go to a dance. Alice and I and sometimes Ivan would be at home with Mom and Dad, or we would just be home with each other. So when the boys would come home from wherever they had gone, it would be dark, it would be later at night, and they needed to walk through the dining room to go up the stairway to the bedrooms the bedrooms we all used. Well, sometimes Alice and I would pull out the dining room chairs and kind of make them jagged away from the table. So if they weren't really looking or if they weren't watching closely, they'd just bang into these chairs as they came in. Well, Mother and Dad's bedroom was down on the same level as the dining room. So, so that would cause kind of a ruckus to happen, and it was noisy. And Alice and I would actually, if we hadn't fallen asleep, we would kind of wake up with that too, and wake up a little bit more, and we laugh. And we thought that was so funny because we kind of felt like we got them, so. But it was fun. It was all in fun. Another story I do remember also, and this was kind of also played on my older brothers. This would happen as kind of an outdoor event. They would do their chores at night at the barn or in the hog pens and all the things they needed to do as chores. And then they would come up to the house to clean up and to get ready so that they could go out for the evening. Well, in the winter time, we'd have snowbanks that would be in the yard area around the porch to the house and everything, and sometimes the snow was deep. We always had the sidewalk shovel that came up to the porch outside. And they would come in and clean up and do whatever they were going to do and get ready to leave. When they would come back to the house from the barn, they sometimes had their bottle of entertainment for the evening or liquor that they would stash in the snowbank, so they could just grab their bottle out of the snowbank because, of course, they knew exactly where they put it. Well, sometimes we'd go out, and this was probably Alice and I, or maybe it was just me, but we'd go out and I'd put them in a different place in the snowbank. I put the bottle of booze in a different place in the snowbanks. And so they'd have to either, with their dress shoes, have to walk through snow, or they'd kind of have to look for where we put them. But they were always in that general area. We didn't take them to a different part of the farm or anything. We just adjusted them in the snowbank outside the porch. But we kind of got a real kick out of doing that. I mean, I did. I thought that was really funny. And they probably were not happy at all. But I would be back in the house before, as they were leaving, I'd be back in the house, and I'd go sit on the couch with my dad because we would read books together. Or I would read to him, basically. I would read to Dad. And also it was that was my safe place, so my brothers couldn't get a hold of me. But I always thought it was kind of funny. They probably weren't very happy with me.
You want to know something mischievous, I would say that in this case, we must have taken after Mother, because I don't remember her dad ever getting himself in trouble.
My favorite memory was playing Murder in the Dark. After we would have dinner, the family dinners at Grandma and Grandpa's, all of us kids would go upstairs. And we would go into the bedroom that Aunt Eva and Aunt Alice and Aunt Rita shared, and we would play Murder in the Dark. A made-up game, but it sure was a whole lot of fun. And I'm amazed that we all lived through that without ever getting hurt. We would jump from bed to bed. We would get up and curl up and hide on top of the dressers. It was just insane childhood activity that was hysterical. And again, just even talking about it, Bevy and I were laughing like crazy.
Well, my role was to be Mother's helper. I did not ever have to go out and do chores, except maybe during threshing. I had to get eggs and then like that. But whatever Mother wanted done, she'd say, Eva, you go do that because your legs are younger than mine. And that was my chore. Now, my role in the family would have been Mom's helper. I did the housework.
Our favorite chore, again, this is something Bev and I talked about and shared and had the exact same memory. We did not grow up on the farm. We grew up in that cafe and gas station. And our role there, our chore that we always had to do there, was dishes. There were dishes all day long coming in from that cafe, and we had to do them and get them done and get them back out there. We complained a lot, but we also laughed and talked a lot.
Mother was a very organized person. And she had to be organized to deal with her 9 children. So she had ways of marking all the clothing, really lived on a schedule, and so we were taught to respect that schedule. But she was also a very good cook. She had worked in a restaurant and had been a waitress and also a cook. Her fried chicken was just super. It was actually baked chicken.
Mm-hmm.
She would take whatever number of chickens she thought she needed and put them in a pan that was about 30 inches square, and it would fit in this deep oven, coal-burning stove, and she would bake it. And then when she took it out, that pan was prepared for another chicken roast. It just went down in the basement, was covered, and then taken back up. Saturday was chicken butchering. Sunday was chicken dinner. I was just into the smell of the good chicken bacon.
Mom sewed a lot. She patched a lot because there were a lot of us, and things get ripped and torn and buttons get off and all that kind of stuff. And she cooked and baked a lot. Since we were a big crowd and were hungry all the time, we always had a number of chickens, little chicks we got in the spring, and as they grew and everything, and then by midsummer they were probably ready for us to kill and pick the feathers and clean. And so we all kind of stood in a circle in the backyard outside where the chickens were housed, and Mom would slit the neck and they would jump for quite a while, and then they're dipped in boiling water so that the feathers can be removed more quickly. And then we would all pull out these, especially the big feathers, and then as much as we could get, we would take feathers and remove them from the chickens. And then there was a whole day of cleaning these chickens, and that we were going to eat, of course, all winter long. Every Sunday we'd have baked chicken. So that was kind of the story about the chickens and cleaning.
I remember one time when they was butchering chickens, and if I'm not mistaken, there was a chicken or two. The boys would cut the heads off, and they for some reason cut more heads off than they found chickens, and then she found some later on that had bounced around in the grass or someplace, and she was upset about that. So that's 2 things I can remember about those 2 great people.
I remember prior to electricity, we had this big dining room table, and so in order to read or study, we had these lanterns, and we had an Aladdin lamp, a couple of Aladdin lamps. They all were on kerosene. So and we could read and sit around the table and color or do math or whatever age you were, you did at that table with those lamps. Well, then I remember when we got electricity, and the thing I remember the most about when we got electricity is that we got this huge light pole out in the yard, and they called it the yard pole, and it had a strong light up on the top, and so at night in the summer we could play out there. We could play tag and all hide and seek and all kinds of things out in the yard at night. It was like 5 or 6 or 7. It was Rural Electric Association. They called it the REA, and we were so excited about getting the REA. Now, prior to that, we had a windmill. We had a wind charger, and so we had that current. Current that would run the pump on the wind charger. We had the batteries stored in the garage.
There was another method that farmers used that preceded wind, and that was carbide gas, carbide material. If you added water, it would give off a combustible gas.
Mm-hmm.
And actually our farm buildings and even some of the house had fixtures in it to burn that gas.
Oh, wow.
And we had that carbide tank, which was underground with raised up just above to take the lid off to make sure the water was at the right level or whatever. But that was not a good solution. The late 30s, that Dad got a wind generator for a 32 volt DC system. We even had a kerosene refrigerator. The energy, that was something that caused me to be interested in engineering.
I'm sure.
Was that little burner down there would end up cooling the refrigerator part.
Right.
So we didn't have a deep freeze at the bottom. We had a little burner.
Right.
I actually remember when the plumbing was added. That was in maybe about 1940.
Really?
There was an enclosed porch on the back of our house, and that's where the bathroom was built. But we didn't have a good well. We had to buy tanks of water and buy their clothing and that from Amazon. Well, it was the same thing back when I was a kid, just using different communication, and they didn't always get delivered to the doorstep. They were delivered to the mailbox. Yeah, you had to look at the Sears Roebuck catalog, and there was a Montgomery Ward catalog. That was always a big day when the package arrived. And these were pretty good sized packages, and not always wrapped up the best. There weren't cardboard boxes that Amazon uses. These were just brown paper wrapped with a lot of string around it, and sometimes the clothing would be peeking out when it finally arrived, and you had to get to the mailbox. You didn't want to have a rainy day for delivery. I remembered one thing about that. When I got older, I was going to go to the clothing store and make sure the clothes fit, and especially the shoes, because it was uncomfortable sometimes wearing those shoes where somebody guessed at the sizes.
Exactly. And then after you graduated high school, did you guys stay and help on the farm for a year before?
Well, that's an interesting story. I wanted to play football, and they had a little bit of spring football, and that was during the 8th period. It was not after school practice. So I went out for spring football, but then come fall, and then practice was after school, and that was short time. And so Dad didn't think I should go out. The season started, a guy that was playing left tackle somehow got injured in the second game. So the next Monday morning, Coach caught me in the hallway and he asked me if it thought it would make a difference if he came out and talked to Dad. And I said, well, sure, can't hurt. So then I talked to Dennis. I said, Dennis, if you would take care of the chores this year, then I'll stay home a year, and you can play football, and I'll take care of the chores. So Dennis stayed home, farmed for a year, actually 2 years, because Dwayne joined the Navy when he was still 17, because the Navy had a program then if you joined while you were 17, you could get out the day before your 21st birthday. So Dwayne took advantage of that. Dennis was still home, but then he volunteered for the draft, which was a 2-year program within the year after that. And then Frank stayed home and farmed for a couple of years until Dad decided to sell.
The close-knit family they had was probably his best memory. I mean, because he was close to his brothers and sisters.
And what were some of Dad's roles and chores on the farm?
Well, I knew him after the farm. For a while, he ran the farm. And I think he thought maybe that was going to be his role in life, because I know when he proposed to me, he asked me if it bothered him if he'd be a farmer.
What'd you say?
I said, I guess not. I mean, you love somebody, you don't love him because he's a farmer or whatever he is. But then he decided to go to school.
Sale was a couple days before Thanksgiving. I took leave and came home for a part of that September, and Frank was actually up at State out for freshman football. Right in early October, Dwayne got out of the Navy, so then he came home, and Dwayne and I helped get things ready. And then my classes started Monday after Thanksgiving, and so it was a big change in life. So I actually, after the sale got started, I actually left and drove to Rapid City. I worked part-time for a while I was in college as a TV repairman. And then in my sophomore year, and then I started going to Newman Club, and that's where I met Mom. They have swing dancing. And so that's really where we met, was on the dance floor.
Well, why did Grandpa decide to sell?
Well, because he would have liked to have sold earlier. There was no provision for farmers or even self-employed people to get Social Security until in the mid-50s, when that regulation was changed. Then the self-employed were able to double up their deposits in order to get a worthwhile Social Security payment. Dad had to stay on the farm for a couple of years, and he didn't sell the farm on the sale. He just sold the business.
And then in later years, Mom came and lived with our family in Denver. And she was 75 when she moved in. That was really interesting because Bud spent a great deal of time building this room onto the back of our house for her to live. It was I guess you'd call it an efficiency kind of apartment. So it worked out really nice. She was in our home. It was easy for her to come and go and for me to come and go. And it was great. And she was glad to be there, and we were happy to have her. It's great to be able to have your grandparent live with you. It was also neat then that all of my other siblings and their families could come and visit and would come and visit. It was really neat. But some of the things she used to talk about, not in the early days when she first came, but later on when she was, maybe after 10 years or so that she had been there, she talked about the Dust Bowl days a lot, about how first of all it was a drought, and it was, the dirty 30s, and it was, then the dust would blow in. It was like a black day. It would be like it was dark all day, and they'd cover all the windows and everything because the dust blew. And then she'd talk about that, and then she'd talk about the grasshoppers that came after the Dust Bowl days, and she talked a lot about the grasshoppers because they ate everything in sight. And she'd always talk about this nice tree that they had in the house yard and behind our house, and the grasshoppers ate every bit of it. It was gone when the grasshoppers were gone. So
in the late 30s, the older ones would make root beer, and sometimes they'd get a little too much yeast in it. So I remember sitting at the place they had it. It was in the basement, right beneath the dining room, and we'd be sitting there eating supper, and we'd hear a pop, and then there'd be a fizz, and then there'd be a mess to clean up, and so that making root beer was always good, and then if you had a little homemade ice cream and a little homemade root beer, that was good. And I don't know, Dad was really down on alcohol because actually a couple of his uncles had troubles with alcohol.
We always had a good time. We had, when I was smaller, we played things out front of the house on summer nights, and Mom would direct it. When we got older, my brothers were very kind to me, and they took me a lot of places they didn't have to, and it was always a joyful reunion when we would get together with the whole family.
More often than not, we went to see them.
And then what about friends of the family? Did they?
Oh yeah, there were always somebody. There were nieces and nephews, and then there was classmates and people that they just saw only once a year maybe or something.
Well, I wanted to talk about Christmas a little bit. I loved the anticipation of midnight mass. We would go to bed before, and then we would get up and we would get dressed and go to midnight mass, which was dark and at night and cold, and it was different to be going out at dark like that. And we'd have midnight mass, and we'd come back home and everything, and then we'd have whatever for Christmas. And then all around the table, we just put our things around the table, which was great. Everybody had a chair, and you had on your plate, we always had, I forgot that, we always had a grapefruit and an apple and an orange on our plates. So we always had fresh fruit in the morning, Christmas morning. And then also, I wanted to talk about the Christmas evening, because on Christmas evening, it was so exciting. Our four older ones, Marie and her spouse, Pat, and Marceline and Bill, and Magdalene and Lucian, and Wilford and Marie, and then all of their children would come to our house in the evening. And so I would stand at our north window and watch the in-drive. We called our driveway the in-drive, and our in-drive was, I think, a quarter of a mile long. So you could see cars coming in our in-drive for quite a while. So I would stand at that north window and just anticipate and couldn't wait for all these people to come to our house on Christmas evening. And then we'd have a big meal, which was always fun. And we'd eat in shifts, of course, because we couldn't all eat around the table at the same time. So, and we'd all help with dishes and talk and visit, and the kids would all play, and the parents would all visit, and it was just a really fun time, and I loved that.
I think he always enjoyed his family. He always wanted to go visit, and he enjoyed being with his folks. His dad didn't talk a lot, but he was always there. Always went there for Christmas, and Mrs. Kurtenbach, of course, always had a nice dinner. She always had a nice dinner, but there weren't many decorations. Very few.
Who was all there?
Well, all of his brothers and sisters usually, and the older three sisters. And that.
What is your favorite memory of becoming a Kurtenbach and joining that family?
It's probably the older Kurtenbach, the three older sisters and a half brother, Wilford, they always had so much fun together. They made their own fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was always a lot of laughter when they were around. In and out, you know, whatever was convenient, they'd stop by. And then a lot of times the nieces and nephews would come in. So that was pretty busy because it's a big family and everybody would kind of stop by for Christmas one way, you know, for a short time at least. Oh yeah, they always made their own fun. Particularly the three older sisters in Wilford had a lot of fun together. I mean, they laughed at their own jokes and they really enjoyed each other.
And then your best memory of Grandpa John or Grandma Theodora?
Well, Grandma Theodora, I admired her because every Christmas night and Easter Sunday noon, she had 25 extra people for those particular meals, and I thought that was very commendable.
We went out and did chores, and Dad disappeared. He was gone. He had to go check on something someplace to do something. But the minute you're done with chores, he could tell it because he was home. There was something else to do. He made sure you kept working.
Okay.
One thing, nothing mischievous on Grandpa and Grandma's farm, but I do remember when we was always over there. It was either in the wintertime when we got bigger, we was up in the hay mound playing and raising heck. In the summer, we was always over there for Easter, and I can remember picking Easter eggs up out of the rock foundation.
Yep.
We'd go outside. Grandma had Easter eggs all over, and all of us grandchildren would have to go out on our Easter egg hunting. That rock foundation, there was eggs stuck all over that house. Yeah.
The story I would like to tell you about my husband, Richard, and the great effect that the Kurtenbach family had on him. The day of our wedding, after the ceremony, we were standing outside in the reception line, and we had been standing there quite a while. People were coming down, and Richard took my hand and looked at me, and he said, "There's still so many people coming, and they're all hugging and kissing." He said, "I'm not used to that," and it was just such a smile on his face. And the most important part of this was we had such an effect on him. As I think about it now, I think we changed him for all the years to come. As we had our children and our grandchildren, Richard couldn't get enough hugs and kisses. And when the kids came over, boy, the very first person they needed to go to was Grandpa, because he was waiting for those hugs and kisses.
What was the best story that Everett could offer about joining the Kurtenbach clan?
The best thing I can say, but I'm speaking for someone else, and I'm not comfortable with that, but he enjoyed the reunions. He always made plans. He did that, put into his vacation plans. So that was very important for us.
And he was very moved by the fact that when Carl and I married the first time, we were married in an Episcopalian church, and Alice and Bud came and their children brought Mom up to the wedding and also a small reception. Carl was very moved that Mother came from Denver to be able to join our celebration. What she did is she came with Alice and Bud and family, and they came to the church. We had the ceremony there, and then we came back to our home and had a cake and refreshments here at the house.
Okay, got many stories, many stories, but there are a couple that I really like that I should tell. When I came to the Kurtenbachs for a weekend, we weren't married, and your mom was fixing dinner for quite a few people were there. And then all of a sudden, all the men sat down at the table, and I'm going, what's going on? Because all the women were standing, all the men were sitting at the table, they started eating. And I said, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, this is the way they do it because the farmers, you know, they all work hard out in the fields and all. Well, these farmers were not working out in the field. They were still in the city. And I wanted to sit down there and eat too. So Kurt's mom, the next day for dinner, pulls up a chair and lets me sit with the men to eat dinner. So see, city chick, I don't go for that. So anyway, and then there was another one about after we got married and we had the 3 little kids with us. And grandma was going to make pancakes for us. And she had about this much oil in the pan. And I said, I'm not eating these. They've got to be the worst thing in the world. Worst thing. And he says, just don't worry about it. Just eat it and keep your mouth shut. And so she started dealing out these pancakes to us. And I thought, oh, how do I tell her? And I tasted one. And I tasted another one. And pretty soon I said, oh my gosh, these are so good. And the kids ate them like little pigs. They loved them. I loved them. So that was it about that. We were going to be eating Grandma's pancakes with oil about like that thick because they were really good.
Dwayne loved to share a story of arriving in Parkson to visit. He stood alone at the door and rang the bell. When his mom opened the door, he said, surprise. She looked him in the eye and asked, where's Carol? His funny answer obviously did not impress her because she told him to come back when his wife was with him and closed the door. Always laughed when he told the story because as she sold it, he headed right back to the car to get her.
What about Peg?
I think that she was just happy to be in the farm. We were a big loving family, and she was from a big loving family. And so she just added on to the family. It's a lucky day to be doing a storytelling. Today would be Dad's 135th birthday. Hope you guys are having a good time. Take care of all those little kids in the sandbox. That was my favorite part, is watching those kids grow.
The next memory is one time in high school when Alice and I were going to go on a date, I think maybe to a movie or to a dance. It just happened that she was at Bill and Marshaline's house with a whole bunch of family members, so I had to drive out to Bill and Marshaline's farm, which was in the Milltown area, which is a little bit of a drive, but I knew where they lived and knew about where they lived. So, and I knew Bill and Marceline because they were from Parkston. I saw them in church all the time, and that was they were familiar to me. So I drive out there and I get to their farm. I go up to the door and knock, and Marceline comes to the door, and I say, "Hi, is Alice here?" And she said, "Yeah, she's here." And so I assumed that the next step would be she would say, "Wait here, I'll bring her. I'll go get her and bring her to you." Well, no, she didn't do that. She said, come on in, and we'll see if we can find her. So we walked through the entire house, past all these different relatives who were not talking anymore. They were all just sitting there looking at me as I walked through. We finally found her towards the back end of the house, and then she and I left and we went on our date. But that was kind of a test, I think. I'm not sure, and I know that I passed the test because I got out of there with her. We were in college already, yeah. Her brother Jack was getting married to Mary in Illinois, and Alice was in the wedding party, but Alice didn't have a way to get to Illinois. So I was appointed or commissioned to take her to the wedding. I had a special bond with Jack because I belonged to the ATO fraternity, and Jack was a member of the ATO fraternity at the University of South Dakota. So we had to drive to Illinois in my 56 Chevy, and it was a 2-day trip, which meant that we had to stop somewhere along the way, and that raised a few eyebrows. I might just point out that my mother spoke to me for about a 3-minute tirade to explain the virtue of being a good man on this trip, which I, of course, didn't need any coaching. I was always that way anyway. And even Jack said, now, before we left, he said, now be careful, which we were. And we went on to the wedding, had a good time. I enjoyed spending the time with the family. I got to know Mary's family a little bit and had a chance to talk to her dad about the farm, because she was raised on a farm and he was a farmer, and we had a few things in common there. So we drove to Illinois and had the wedding and then came back.
Jack's wedding, kind of from a point of view of Irene and I, we had just moved to Brookings, and I had my first job teaching there. We still had our 51 Plymouth, but we decided we wanted to go to his wedding, and we drove out to Illinois in a car that did not have a working heater. Well, we enjoyed the wedding. I said, we were a little short of cash. Fortunately, Wilford loaned me some money to buy gas to get back to Brookings. In '85, when Jack was very ill, approaching the end, one morning, Frank came in my office at work and said, get your clothes, we're going to California to see Jack, because he doesn't have much time. We got them in the afternoon, and then that evening, Frank and I decided we would stay up through the night and take turns sitting with him, and so I happened to be sitting with Jack when he passed away. And I was so glad that Frank had done that, and that I got a chance to talk to him when he was still living.
Our wedding was November 27th, 1965. I wanted to thank all of my siblings. I really appreciate having all of my siblings, and I wanted to thank my nieces and nephews. We grew up with our nieces and nephews, and it was fantastic. I loved it. And all of my siblings, so I think God is good. See, I've written on the back of this picture. So, first of all, it says, life and like. We're like an old quilt, our family. We're beautifully placed together and pieced together like a quilt.
Over the years, I'd spent quite a bit of time in that living room talking to he and Theodora, because even back in those days, in the early days of our dating, Alice usually made me wait before we were ready to leave to go wherever we were going to go. But back to her dad just for a minute. He was really a neat person. I considered him to be a person of great integrity and strong character. Just listening to Alice talk about him, he was very kind and gentle, at least to his daughters. He was a great farmer, very successful farmer. Of course, he had raised many of his own farmhands, which maybe contributed, but they were all hard workers, sort of cut from the same mold as he and his brothers and ancestors were. At his funeral, I couldn't get over how many people came up to Theodora and or his sons and said, he was really a good man. Several people did that. So that told me that in the Dimock area, he was very well known and highly respected.